for this episode is Noah Jesko and Brayden Hawkins. So, Noah, I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right. Hello, everyone. Glad to be back. Thank you all for listening. Today, we really wanted to focus on a new product that we have, our 30% Ultra Tub. It's a 30% protein, 10% fat tub that we have designed specifically for cows on pasture. It works great for pairs or cows that are about to calve, anything in that area. And part of that, in that product, we put Bioplex trace minerals. And so we're lucky enough today to have Brayden Hawkins talk to us about that. And he's just going to kind of go over where they come from, what they are, etc. And we'll kind of flow through that. So whenever y'all are out there pitching this product to our customers, you can better answer any questions that they might have. So once again, 30% ultra, 30% protein, 10% fat with Bioplex trace minerals. And now we'll bring in Brayden. Brayden, can you kind of tell everyone who you are, where you're from, your background, and then we'll get into y'all's product.
You bet, Noah, and just want to start by thanking you all for giving me the opportunity to come join and converse with you all a little bit more about the new Ultra Tub and Bioplex Trace Minerals. But my name is Brayden Hawkins. I'm the Southern U.S. Sales Manager for Ridley Block Operations, which is a part of the greater Alltech Feed Division. At Ridley, we specialize in making, y'all's low moisture blocks and minerals for you. In Alltech, our parent company focuses on manufacturing feed additives, so Bioplex trace minerals, different yeast technologies, essential oils, etc. So get to see the business from a couple different vantage points as a supplement manufacturer, but also as a part of an organization that manufactures the ingredients that goes into the tub itself or the mineral itself. Live now, I guess I'm in the middle of moving to Cranfell's Gap, Texas. Family and I run a few cows there and just try to keep the train on the tracks, my friend.
Yes, sir. So where did you do all of your schooling?
So I did all of my undergraduate work at Texas Tech University, and then I did my MBA at West Texas A&M. So all of my education was in West Texas.
Okay, I really wanted to point that out so that our sales rep knows that you're one of us,
Sure.
You're
Sure.
you're
Yeah.
may not be from the Panhandle, but you studied in the Panhandle. You're a tech guy, so
Yep.
that whenever they're listening to this, they have that with you.
Yeah, and all my
Uh,
family grew up in Clarendon, right east Amarillo, and never in my life did I think I'd be in the feed industry because my dad's been a nutritionist for Purina for over 30 years, but here I am. It's the only job I've ever had. So I
yes, sir.
guess once you get close to something, it's hard to get away from it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I want to start off for our sales reps that might not be familiar with Bioplex. What is it, and how is it different from some other regular trace minerals that might be in some of our products?
Sure. So Bioplex is the brand name of the organic trace minerals that Alltech manufactures at different, locations across the world. So it's zinc, copper, manganese, and cobalt. Those four trace minerals in a proteinated form comprise the Bioplex brand name. So those four trace minerals are the organic forms that we make and we brand them under Bioplex. And so that's what Bioplex is it's just a brand name for those four organic trace minerals.
So whenever you say organic,
Mhm.
what does that mean in the process of how they're made? And then also from a cow's perspective, if you're giving her a traditional trace mineral versus an organic trace mineral.
Sure. So I guess this is maybe a good time to do a little, you know, look back at the history of trace minerals, just because it's important to understand, where we've been and where we are today. So trace minerals, were recognized and as an important part of, cattle nutrition back in the 50s and 60s. And, when they first came out, it was primarily to prevent deficiencies. And the main forms in which they came in back then are oxides and sulfates. And the reason that oxides and sulfates were used is because it's the cheapest way to get them out of the ground. It's basically just the byproduct of mining.
Yes, sir.
There was no additional, production to make them closer to the form that they'd be found in the plants and the grasses that these cattle eat. So where the organic trace minerals really started to come into play was really in the 1980s. And it's just continued to evolve from there. And so, what makes something inorganic is that there's no further production to bind it to a carbon molecule in whatever way. It's just how it comes out of the ground in a rock form. It's very cheap, but there's some negatives that we'll get into here in a second, Noah, that come with that.
Yes, sir.
Organics take it a step farther, and they can be bound to carbons in different ways to make them organic. But what that process of binding them to a carbon does is makes those trace minerals more like what they would be found in, the plants and the roughages that our cattle are eating. And in return, they're more absorbable, and they're just more better utilized.
So can you walk us through the absorption and how the difference in absorption between our sulfates and oxides and the organic bioplex trace minerals? And then can you also talk how that can help a rancher in a day-to-day operation, be that in pregnancy rates, immunity, calf vigor, performance, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So good rule of thumb, basically oxides aren't used hardly at all anymore. If there's an inorganic form being used, it's more than likely a sulfate. And good rule of thumb is that, 50 to 60% of a sulfate form of trace mineral is absorbable. When you start looking at bioplexes, that absorption rate jumps to 80 to 90%. And so, when you start looking at absorption rates, you're paying for that trace mineral through the product. And I don't know about y'all, but when I pay for something, I'd rather get as much use out of it as possible. And on a
Certainly.
sulfate, if only half of it's getting absorbed by the cow, that means the other 50% isn't, putting your dollars to work. Whereas on a bioplex trace mineral, 80 to 90% of it is being utilized, which is more of your dollars going to improving the performance of those cattle. And the main reason for that is that the way these organic trace minerals are bound, to different, and we could go down a rabbit hole, Noah, of what differentiates this organic trace mineral from this one. And it
Yes, sir.
all has to do with the way they're bound to that zinc or that, cobalt or whatever it is. But those different bonds basically protect that trace mineral in different ways. And what makes Bioplex special is that the bond that we use throughout that proteinated process protects that trace mineral all the way through to the small intestine where most of your absorption happens. There's a big range of pHs from when that cow swallows it and goes through its digestive tract to when it goes to those absorption sites in the intestines. And those different fluctuations in pHs are what a lot of times cause those bonds to break down. And then you've got these, random trace minerals floating around that don't end up getting to the small intestine. So the name of the game is to protect that trace mineral with those different bonds all the way to the intestine to where they can then be disassociated and absorbed. And that's where bioplexes really differentiate themselves. The bond strength that we have through a lot of different pH ranges is stronger than just about any other in the industry.
Okay. And so as that absorption increases and more of that becomes available to the animal, how is that going to increase pregnancy rates, affect immunity, help with calf vigor? Once it's absorbed, how do these organic trace minerals affect those?
Yeah. So I guess to dilute that down, the question you're asking is why are trace minerals important and what do they do for a cow?
Yes, sir.
Trace minerals are the building blocks for a lot of metabolic function. When cows metabolize different things, trace minerals are what make that happen. A lot of, hormones, things like that are tied to trace mineral status. All those things inside the cow that influence pregnancy rates, milk production, etc., go back to trace minerals. And so, an analogy I like to use is, I like to look at our cows as athletes, because we're asking them to do a lot of different things all year long. For pretty much every cow out there, they're either carrying a calf or nursing a calf, 365 days a year. And so we're asking a lot out of them. And, obviously you have to meet the basic needs of protein and energy first. If you don't do
Yes,
that,
sir.
it doesn't matter if anything else, is on top of it. And products like the Ultra Plus tub checks those boxes and then some of meeting those basic, macronutrient requirements. But from there, we can start looking at maximizing the genetic potential of each of those cows. And so, going back to the athlete analogy, I'm 5'8", don't have a lot of genetic potential to be a very good basketball player. Michael Jordan, on the other hand, had all the genetic potential in the world to be a good basketball player. But the little stuff he did on top of just having the genetic potential to unlock that genetic potential, good diet, working out, things like that, is kind of how trace mineral works. If those cows that are left in the cow herd today are pretty good ones. They went through an extremely intensive drought through the late teens, early 20s. The cows that made it through that, probably pretty good ones. People have cold harder the last couple of years than they probably ever had because those cold cows are worth something. So if those cows are still in your cow herd, they probably have a lot of genetic potential to do something for you. And so finding ways to extract that little bit of extra performance that we know is there are what trace minerals can help accomplish.
And
And the main
that's the
metrics
thing.
we use to measure that are obviously, pregnancy rates, weaning
Yep.
weights, calf health, etc.
And that's something that we have talked about in some of our other podcasts is, producers get paid on pounds,
Yep.
and you get more pounds by having more calves on the ground. And calves on the ground only come from cows that are pregnant. And if you can increase pregnancy in these cows just slightly by doing something a little bit different than what you've done before, there's a lot of potential to capitalize on more pounds, more dollars. And something like this, it's not a big change, and you can do something like that. And so I'm glad that you pointed that out. I like the athlete analogy. I'm gonna have to go home and I guess I'll have to start taking some trace minerals because I think I am an athlete, but maybe I just have not been capitalizing on it enough. I'll see what my wife says about that one. Uh,
Whatever
so
helps you
as a
sleep at night, man.
yeah, so as the range specialist here for Nutrition Plus, like we deal a lot, and I deal a lot whenever I'm out taking grass samples with antagonists, iron, sulfur, molybdenum, that rob trace mineral availability. How does Bioplex overcome some of those challenges presented by those antagonists?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of different ways in which I look at antagonisms. Over time, trace mineral supplementation has almost turned into a mindset of more is better, more is better, more is better. We see some really, really high levels of trace minerals in different supplements. And I'm a firm believer that you kind of hit a point of diminishing returns to where you reach this threshold of performance by supplementing with trace minerals, and anything on top of that, the added performance falls off quick and you're just kind of wasting money. So part of antagonisms that I see, especially when you're sulfate or supplementing with high levels of sulfates, is, not only do you have these antagonism floating around, you really have these high levels, high concentrations of trace minerals that are then competing for all these, binding sites or absorption sites in the cow. And so it's just kind of mass chaos in there. So, one nice thing about Bioplex is that since they are 20-30% more absorbable, we can get away with supplementing at a little lower rate relative to what you're maybe seeing on sulfate levels from a ppm standpoint. And so there's less competition in there. The second piece goes back to what I talked a second ago about Noah, is kind of those bonds on the Bioplexes protecting that trace mineral. As it protects it from those, antagonisms floating around in the cow, it keeps them from latching on to those
Mm-hmm.
antagonisms as it goes through the digestive tract, and again gets it to its final destination of the small intestine. So like I said, twofold. There's less just trace minerals floating around because we are able to supplement lower levels because of the improved absorption rates, and then the protective mechanism of those bonds is what keeps it
Yes,
kind of
sir.
safe from those antagonisms.
Could you talk a bit about any data or studies that Alltech has done that can show that our guys can talk to ranchers about and say, hey, this is something that they saw, this is an effect that it had. Can you talk a little bit about any of that?
Yeah, we've done some really, really big ranch studies from Florida to Arizona using Bioplex trace minerals. And, again, what we were looking to find are, can we influence those key performance metrics that drive profitability for cow-calf producers? So, pregnancy rates, weaning weights, and overall calf health. The tagline we like to use is more calves, heavier calves, healthier calves. And so all the research that we did focused around that. And so I'll draw from some research we did with a really big ranch in Florida. They run a couple thousand cows down there, and I know it's not the same environment that y'all have in West Texas, but directionally the research and the size of the ranches are very similar to some of the customers that y'all would service. And what we saw, and this is what probably impresses me the most about this research, is we were starting with a cow herd that was already firing at a 90-91% conception rate,
Yes,
which is
sir.
a pretty high threshold to start with. I mean,
Yes,
a lot of
sir.
people would be dang happy with that. And we were able to bump that on almost 600 cows to 96%. So a 4% jump in conception rates on 600 cows for an already very high performing herd just validified that, hey, this is not just for somebody who's doing nothing. This is for the person that also is operating at a very high level and wants to take that next step and continue to unlock the genetic potential of those cows. So, on average, we have seen across different research studies about a 2.5 to 3% jump in conception rates across the aggregate of the research that we've done. But another cool thing that we're seeing is not only are we getting more calves, we've on average, and this is probably the most profound part to me, seen a 24-pound jump in weaning weight across the board. So not only are you getting more calves, those calves are heavier, and I think it's all tied back to we're influencing, the amount of IGs or immunoglobulins in the colostrum of those cows, which those IGs basically are the measurement of antibodies that are in those cows. So these calves are just getting off to a better start. We all know, if you've ever been around a cow, those calves that get off to a good start that first week just tend to do better
Yes,
throughout
sir.
the rest of their lives. I mean, those ones that you gotta, baby on from day one, they always just seem to be a bit behind. And so getting those calves off to a good start because we're influencing the quality and the concentration of antibodies in that cow's milk is a really good one. And then that also ties into just healthier calves overall. We see a pretty consistent 2% reduction in morbidity across all the research trials that we've done. And this isn't as documented in terms of hard research, but there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence showing that we're impacting things like foot rot and pink eye in the cow as well by supplementing some of these, trace minerals as well. And that's stuff that we hope to continue to research and maybe tie some harder science to. But
Yes, sir.
anecdotal evidence is always cool to see things like that pop up as well.
I think it's important that you touched on the weaning weights because seeing a 1, 2, 2.5% increase in pregnancy rates, that for a lot of producers, that might not be a very large number. If they have 100 cows, you might get one cow more bred per year, maybe two, and it's not that big of a just an it doesn't pop out number wise. But then if you're selling, 90 calves and those calves are weighing 15 to 20 pounds more whenever they go to the sale barn, and you get that sale sheet and you can look at it and you can really see that, that I think a lot of producers understanding and now knowing that these Bioplex trace minerals can help achieve that. I think that's really important.
And I want to
So,
take that research a step farther, Noah, because we didn't just stop after 1 year of supplementing those cows with bioplexes. We carried it on for 4 years. And so we got to evaluate heifer performance on cows that were supplemented with bioplex while those calves were in utero, etc. And, age to puberty on the heifers that came out of cows that were supplemented bioplex was about 18 days quicker. So they were calving just about 18, 20 days earlier. And you think you get a calf on the ground 20 days before its counterparts, that's 20 days extra growth at just call it 2 pounds a day, conservative numbers. I mean, that's 40 extra pounds, and 40
yes, sir.
pounds today is worth 120, 130, $140. So on top of the immediate benefit you get from supplementing with them, there's also generational improvements on the cattle that were in utero on the cows that were supplemented with bioplex.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because the next question I was going to ask ties directly into that. So we often get pushback from producers just about cost, and obviously, that is something that they're very worried about. So in terms of feeding a Bioplex trace mineral, if a rancher is pushing back on us and saying, "Hey, I'm not comfortable doing it year round because I want to save a little bit of money," what time in the production cycle would it be most important to get those trace minerals in front of their cattle?
Yeah, the obvious answer is pre-breeding, but I would argue that you know introducing those minerals 60 days before calving through the end of breeding season would be the ideal window. Going back to bumping the trace mineral status of those cows 60 days before that calf hits the ground obviously influences milk quality, things like that. So I'd say 60 days, before calving through the end of breeding would if you had to kind of concentrate your timeline, that's when I'd do it.
I'm glad that you said that, because we have mentioned in a couple of our other talks that exact same thing, that it's important to have mineral in front of producers' cattle year round. But if they want to do a step up scenario, but they don't want to do that step up all year round, that time frame is very, very important. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that.
And
So
it makes sense from a forage availability standpoint too. I mean, you typically think most people start calving in the spring. Obviously, there's plenty of exceptions for people that calve in the fall, but let's just say you're calving in the spring. So you'll be calving right there, 60 days before calving. If you start in March, is probably your lowest quality of forage. So you're not getting a lot of supplementation of trace minerals through the forage in January. So being able to introduce them at the time, when you're probably nutrition of your available forage is the lowest from a trace mineral standpoint, makes a lot of sense in my mind.
yes, sir. So to kind of wrap up, we've talked about what Bioplex is, how it's different from regular sulfates and oxide trace minerals. We talked about how it works, how it's better absorbed, how you can decrease the actual amount in a mineral if you're using a trace mineral like Bioplex. We talked about how it deals with antagonists, and we talked about when you should feed it. So if you were at a sale barn and you're about to walk out and a guy grabs you and he's like, "Hey, you work for Alltech. Give me 30 seconds, 45 seconds, synopsis, what it is, how it works, why you should feed it."
Yep. So I'm gonna hit you with another analogy, Noah. I'm gonna use something I think everybody in the beef business can relate to. When I think of trace minerals, I almost think of it like beef. You know, copper sulfate and copper proteonate or bioplex copper at the end of the day are both coppers, just like a McDonald's hamburger patty and a ribeye steak are both beef at the end of the day. But when you start breaking it down, they're very different for you nutritionally. And obviously, feeding copper sulfate or eating a McDonald's hamburger is better than starving. But if you
Yes.
really want to maximize the performance of your cow herd, obviously or yourself, you're more likely to eat a higher quality cut of beef or use a higher quality trace mineral. So that's kind of how I would summarize it in 30 seconds.
Okay. So going from a McDonald's to a 5-star
Yeah.
ribeye. There you go. I think
Yep.
that's a
I
good way
mean,
to put it. Definitely something that all of our sales reps and producers can relate to.
you
So
bet.
perfect. Brayden, well, we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this product. We really, really like this tub, and we really, really like Bioplex Trace Minerals. So we're extremely glad that it's in the tub. Uh, Thanks for coming and spending some time talking to our guys about why they work and how they could pitch it to their customers.
No, thank y'all for having me, and I just want to thank Nutrition Plus and all of you for your partnership. And if there's anything that myself or our team can do to better support you, we're just a phone call away. So thank y'all.
Yes, sir.